sixth 3-year-old who exposed the dark secret. A sixth 3-year-old man was mocked, framed, and pushed aside until one shocking moment exposed a dark secret no one was supposed to uncover. This story is intense, unexpected, and worth every second. So watch till the end. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Ethan Cole was the kind of man people instinctively moved aside for. Not because he was loud or intimidating, but because there was something in his eyes that said, "I've seen hell." And I walked out of it on my own 2 feet. At 63, his hair was more salt than pepper. His knees complained on rainy days, and his back sometimes stiffened when he got out of bed too fast. But beneath the worn denim and loose jacket, the body of a retired Special Forces operator was still there. Slower, maybe, but precise, controlled, and dangerous. He lived alone in a modest house a few blocks from Riverside Park. The neighborhood was changing. Some said it was getting better, which usually meant more chain cafes and rising property taxes. But for Ethan, better wasn't about the stores. It was about whether people still looked each other in the eye, still said good morning on the sidewalk. He'd seen places look clean on the outside and rot from the inside. Every morning followed the same rhythm. Coffee brewed in a dented old machine that had survived more moves than he could count. He turned on the radio, not for the music, but for the low murmur of news anchors, reminding him that the world was still spinning. The headlines were often ugly: violence, anger, division, but Ethan listened, because pretending not to see the darkness never made it go away. On most afternoons, he could be found at Riverside Park, sitting on the same wooden bench, with a book in hand. He favored history, memoirs, especially of people who had stood up against injustice. Sometimes he read about the civil rights movement and remembered the first time he saw Dr. King's speech replayed on a black and white TV in his childhood home. His mother's eyes had filled with tears. "Remember this," she'd whispered. "This is what courage looks like." Ethan had done his own share of fighting, but in other countries, under other flags, in conflicts whose names most people forgot once the news cycle moved on. He carried shrapnel scars on his legs, a faint line across his ribs from a knife fight, and a wound no one saw, the memory of men he couldn't bring home. War teaches you many things, he often thought. How to move quietly, how to make decisions in seconds, and how to live with ghosts. His wife, Angela, had been the one person who softened all of that. She used to joke that he was a grizzly bear with a good heart. When cancer took her, the house became so quiet it felt like a punishment. His son, Marcus, had drifted away, convinced he could never measure up to the father who'd been a hero in uniform. Even tried to explain that medals weren't worth half as much as showing up for dinner on time, but the distance grew anyway. Calls became rare, visits even rarer. The afternoon it all changed, started out almost painfully ordinary. The sky was a clear, soft blue, the kind you only appreciate fully when you've lived long enough to know how quickly weather and life can turn. Riverside Park was alive with small, gentle moments. A grandfather teaching his granddaughter how to ride a bike. A couple of retirees arguing about baseball stats. A woman walking a little dog that clearly believed it was a wolf. Ethan sat on his usual bench, the wood worn smooth by years of use. In his hands was a book titled Echoes of Freedom, a collection of speeches and letters written by activists who had stood up against racial hatred. He wasn't reading it for entertainment. He read it as a reminder. Progress was never permanent. It had to be defended, again and again, generation after generation. He heard them before he saw them, 4 male voices, loud, mocking, carrying that particular tone that said, "We own this place." When they came into view, they walked in a loose formation, like a pack that had bitten together before, all white, late 20s to mid-30s. Boots, jackets with patches that weren't quite obvious enough to be illegal, but clear enough for anyone who knew the symbols of hate. The leader was tall and broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a crooked smirk. His name, Ethan would later learn, was Rex Dalton, though on the street he was better known as Rex Fang. But that day he was just another problem walking toward Ethan. They slowed as they approached the bench. The leader tilted his head, studying Ethan like he was an insect under glass. "Well, Look at that, he drawled. Old man's reading about freedom. Cute. Ethan closed the book gently, thumb marking the page. He looked up, meeting the man's eyes without aggression, but without yielding either. Afternoon, Ethan said. Something I can help you with? The second man snorted. You can start by telling us why you're so comfortable sitting here like you own the place. The words were familiar. Ethan had heard versions of them his whole life. Different accents, different ages, same poison. I'm just sitting on a bench, Ethan replied. Public park. The third man stepped closer, the stink of cheap beer on his breath. You people always think everything is public. Maybe you should show some respect. You people. The phrase slid across Ethan's skin like sandpaper. He felt the old anger stir inside him, the anger he'd spent years learning to manage. Anger could be a fuel, but it could also be a trap. He glanced around. A few bystanders had noticed something was off, but these days, people hesitated to get involved. Phones would come out only after the first blow. He knew how this could go. Old black man, 4 white men, misunderstanding. Maybe a headline if it got bad enough. I don't want any trouble, Ethan said, voice steady. You can move on. I will too. But they didn't want peace. They wanted control. They wanted the performance of dominance. Rex reached out, slow and patronizing, placing a hand on Ethan's book. Why don't you hand this over, old man? History's over. Nobody needs this anymore. Ethan's hand tightened, but he didn't pull the book back. Not yet. Instead, he looked straight into Rex's eyes. Let go of the book, son. The word son landed like a slap. Rex's jaw twitched. He shoved the book from Ethan's hands, sending it to the ground. The other 3 laughed. Something inside Ethan went quiet, not broken, not fearful, just focused, the way it used to before a mission. He slowly rose from the bench, joints reminding him they weren't 30 anymore. But his center of gravity dropped, his stance subtly shifting. Years of training reawakened like muscle memory rising from sleep. Rex shoved his shoulder, expecting him to stumble. Ethan didn't move. I told you to move along, Rex hissed, or we'll move you. The first punch came from the second man, sloppy, overconfident. Ethan slipped his head just a few inches to the side, feeling the air of the fist graze past. In that same motion, he trapped the attacker's wrist, twisted, and used the man's own momentum to send him crashing to the ground with a choked cry. The third man lunged. Ethan pivoted, planted his foot, and drove an elbow into the attacker's ribs, followed by a quick sweep that took his legs out from under him. Years of fights in darker places than this park flowed through his body, not as rage, but as precision. Rex came in next, swinging hard, his movements fueled by ego more than skill. Ethan blocked, absorbed the impact with his forearm, and stepped in so close their faces were inches apart. For a heartbeat, Rex saw it, the cold, unflinching gaze of someone who had done this before and survived much worse. Walk away, Ethan said softly. Rex tried to punch again. Ethan hooked his arm and drove him backward into the bench, knocking the breath from his lungs. The fourth man, who had been hanging back, cursed and rushed forward, only to be met with a knee to the stomach and a forearm across the neck, putting him down. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. The 4 men scrambled to their feet, cursing and staggering away, spitting threats they didn't have time to fulfill. Ethan stood alone in the center of the chaos he had contained. His heart beat faster than it had in years. His hands shook not from fear, but from adrenaline and the weight of what had just happened. He bent down, picked up his book, and dusted it off. A little girl on a nearby swing watched him with wide eyes. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. But inside, Ethan knew this wasn't random. Their eyes, their words, the symbols on their jackets, this wasn't just a group of drunk idiots. It felt organized, intentional. And organized hate never came alone. Still, Ethan refused to let bitterness define his final chapters. He volunteered at a local community center, taught self-defense classes to teenagers, especially kids from immigrant families who were just trying to exist in a world that didn't always want them. He listened more than he spoke. The young ones respected him because he didn't talk down to them. He spoke like someone who knew exactly how fragile safety really was. To most people, Ethan was just the quiet old black man who read books in the park and walked home at dusk. But under that calm exterior lived a sharpened sense, the instinct of a protector. When trouble entered a room, he felt it before anyone said a word. And lately, that instinct had been twitching more often. Whispers of assaults in nearby neighborhoods, murmurs about strange men driving slowly through streets where families of color lived. News stories about hate crimes dismissed as isolated incidents. Ethan heard it all, and though he kept turning pages in his book, something deep inside him was bracing, like an old soldier feeling the tremor of artillery far away. He didn't know it yet, but the war he thought he had left behind was about to follow him home into his park, his neighborhood, and his quiet routine. The world was about to test whether an old lion still had any bite left. The police report was supposed to make things feel official, clean, contained. But Ethan knew better than to believe that paperwork solved problems. Officer Daniel Thompson stood beside the patrol car, jotting notes on a tablet. He was in his late 40s, with graying hair at the temples and the weathered look of someone who had spent too many years answering calls that came too late. Ethan had seen him around the neighborhood before. Always respectful, always watchful. So they started it, Thompson said, summarizing. You defended yourself. Witnesses agree. He glanced up. Damn, Mr. Cole. You put them down fast for a man your age. Ethan gave a faint shrug. Old habits. I told them to walk away, they didn't. Thompson nodded slowly. Yeah, I've been hearing that a lot lately. People not walking away. Something in his tone made Ethan look closer. What do you mean, lately? Thompson hesitated, weighing how much to say. Off the record, this isn't the first call we've had like this. Not by a long shot. Ethan folded his arms. Same guys. Sometimes, Thompson replied. Sometimes different faces. Same attitude. This park, 2 blocks over, the bus stop on Lincoln, the grocery store parking lot on 9th. Different locations, same target profile. Target profile, Ethan repeated. You mean people like me? People of color, immigrants, folks who look like they're alone, elderly, anyone they think won't fight back. Thompson's jaw tightened. We treat them as assault cases, hate crimes, when we can prove intent. But these guys, they're slippery. They know where the cameras are, they hide their faces when it counts, and they don't all roll together every time. It's like someone taught them just how far they can push before it becomes a headline. Ethan felt that quiet knot in his chest tighten. And no one's putting these incidents together? Thompson sighed. We're trying, but you know how it goes, Mr. Cole. One event here, one there. Different victims, different precincts. It all gets chopped up into separate files, separate days. Feels like random noise, unless you're the one living in the middle of it. Ethan watched the park as he spoke. A young Latino man walked his bicycle past, eyes flicking nervously toward the patrol car. A woman in a headscarf hurried her child along. Fear left a distinct mark on people. Ethan recognized it instantly. Those men today, he said, they weren't improvising. They were enjoying themselves. Like the violence was a game. Like they were proving something. Thompson nodded grimly. You're not wrong. We picked up one of them last week on a disorderly conduct charge. He made bail fast, real fast, too fast for someone with no steady job. Ethan glanced at him. Someone's backing them. That's my guess, Thompson replied. But guessing and proving are miles apart. And I've got a captain who doesn't want his name in the news unless it's about a charity drive. Silence stretched between them. Ethan felt that old, familiar pull, the one that called him into problems he didn't ask for, didn't deserve, but couldn't ignore. Officer Thompson, he said carefully, if there is someone organizing this, they're not going to stop at shoving old men in the park. They're probing, testing reactions, seeing what they can get away with before people start screaming loud enough to shake City Hall. Thompson looked at him with a mixture of respect and resignation. You sound like you've seen this play out before. I have, Ethan answered. Different uniforms, different languages, same sickness. Thompson finished his notes and closed the tablet. Look, officially this is written up as an assault. Unprovoked attack. You acted in self-defense. No charges. But unofficially. He leaned in a little. Be careful. Guys like that, they don't like being humiliated. And I'm guessing you made some enemies today. I've had enemies before, Ethan replied calmly. I'm still here. Thompson almost smiled. Yeah, I can see that. If you remember anything else, anything at all, call me. He handed Ethan a card. And if anything feels off in the neighborhood, even if you can't put your finger on it, call anyway. As the patrol car pulled away, Ethan slipped the card into his pocket and sat back on the bench. His book lay beside him, still open to the chapter on small acts of resistance. He stared at the pages for a long moment, then closed it gently. On his walk home, he noticed details he'd missed before. A black SUV idling too long at the corner. Two men smoking outside a closed storefront, eyes following a family as they walked past. Flyers plastered on a wall full of subtle dog whistles about taking back our streets and protecting our heritage. Once you started looking for patterns, they appeared everywhere. Back at his house, Ethan made tea instead of coffee. His hands didn't tremble, but his mind was moving quickly, like it used to before a mission briefing. The difference now was cruel. Back then, he'd had a team, equipment, and clear orders. Here, he had no chain of command, just a conscience and a neighborhood that felt increasingly like hostile territory. He turned on the evening news. A segment flashed by about a disturbance across town. No details, just a blurry shot of men running and someone bundled into an ambulance. No mention of race, no mention of pattern. Ethan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He'd spent a lifetime obeying orders, but this felt like something else. A test, maybe. A question aimed at every older person who still believed in the promise of America. Do you still have it in you to stand up, or are you too tired now? He listened to the quiet in his house and knew the answer. He was tired, but he was not done. Hate rarely walks alone. It travels with money, strategy, and ambition. Ethan understood that from his days in uniform. You never just fought the men holding the guns, you fought the invisible hands that put the guns there. The name Rex Dalton stuck in his mind. After a restless night, Ethan decided he needed more than a police report and a business card. He needed information. Old soldiers knew how to dig. He called Mia Grant. Mia was in her early 50s, an investigative journalist whose career had seen both awards and death threats. She and Ethan had met years ago at a veteran support event. She'd been covering a story. He'd been standing quietly in the back. When she later wrote an article about how society forgets its older fighters, she'd quoted him without naming him. That small act of respect had earned his trust. Now, her voice crackled through the speaker. Ethan Cole, you only call me when things are either very bad or very interesting. Which is it today? Maybe both, he replied. He told her what happened in the park, the symbols on their jackets, the pattern Officer Thompson mentioned. When he said the name Rex Dalton, Mia went silent for a few seconds. I've heard that name, she finally said. Low-level enforcer, technically small-time, but his footprints keep showing up in places that feel bigger than him. Bigger how? Ethan asked. Every time there's a protest that turns ugly. Every time a peaceful march gets hijacked by guys who suddenly appear with matching signs and no one knows where they came from, people like him are in the background. Not leading, just stirring. Ethan felt a chill. Someone is using him. Yeah, Mia agreed. And I've been trying to figure out who. Give me a few hours. I'll dig. True to her nature, Mia didn't wait long. She called back with a tone that sounded like she'd just opened a rotten box. Found your man, she said. And more importantly, found who's pulling his strings. Ain't quite. The name she gave him was Victor Hale. Victor Hale was the kind of man the evening news praised for revitalizing struggling neighborhoods. Owner of Hale Urban Development. He had a smile built for television and a portfolio full of gleaming high-rise projects. In interviews, he spoke about opportunity, growth, and modernizing outdated areas. Mia's research told a different story. Hale likes to move into neighborhoods with large minority populations, she explained. Places where families have lived for generations. Then suddenly crime starts to rise. Fear goes up, property values go down, people start selling fast. And guess who's ready to buy the land cheap? Ethan finished the thought quietly. Victor Hale. Bingo. And once he owns enough, He pushes for rezoning, knocks down old houses, builds luxury condos. The original residents, they can't afford to come back. The story is always the same. Revitalization, economic progress, a safer neighborhood. Ethan's mind flicked back to the hateful faces in the park. You think he's funding these extremists? I think he's feeding them, Mia replied. Look, these guys don't suddenly have money for matching gear, transportation, bail, and encrypted group chats on their own. I trace some of the donations to cultural heritage organizations that claim they're just about history and pride. Follow the money a bit more. And some of those donations connect back to shell companies tied to Hale's development firm. And the police? Ethan asked. Some are suspicious, Mia said. Most are overworked. And a few, I'm afraid, are just happy to look the other way as long as the crime eventually cleans up the area and the tax base goes up. I can't spatball. Ethan felt that steady anger harden. This wasn't just about punks shoving elders in the park. This was about calculated, weaponized hate used as a tool for profit. So what's the plan? Mia asked him. I know that tone in your voice. You're not calling me just to vent. He smiled grimly, though she couldn't see it. You remember what you told me once. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. That's cute, she said, considering your idea of sunlight usually involves kicking down doors. Maybe we need both this time, Ethan replied. Proof for you, pressure for the cops, and maybe a reminder to these street thugs that not everyone they target is helpless. Mia was quiet for a moment. I'll dig deeper into Hale's finances, his foundations, his donors. You do whatever it is you do. But Ethan, be careful. Men like Hale don't get this far by being stupid. They get here by being ruthless. And you're not 30 anymore. I know, he said softly, but I'm still here, and I'm still watching. He hung up and sat in silence, the name Victor Hale echoing in his mind. It was a familiar pattern. Powerful man at the top, henchmen at the bottom, innocent families in the middle. Different battlefield, same war. Ethan went to his bedroom closet and opened an old metal box. Inside were relics of a younger life. Dog tags, a faded patch, a folded flag, and at the bottom a leather notebook. In it, he began to make a list. Rex Dalton, Victor Hale, shell companies, crime spikes by neighborhood call, witness statements. Officer Thompson, Mia's research. He wasn't a detective. He wasn't a politician. He was just an old soldier who knew how to see patterns, how to connect seemingly small details into a clear picture. And the picture he was seeing now was ugly, but it was also something else. Actionable. Ethan knew one truth better than most. Charging in blind was how people ended up dead. Planning was survival. Even in civilian clothes, the habit of thinking in terms of reconnaissance, infiltration, and extraction never left him. The first step was simple. Find Rex Dalton. He started with the community center. The younger men there knew the street more intimately than any news anchor. When Ethan casually mentioned a skinhead with a bulldog tattoo and a loud mouth, 3 of them exchanged glances. One pulled up a social media profile on his phone. The username was RexFang88. The pictures matched. From there, it wasn't hard to piece together Rex's favorite bars, his usual hangouts, his bravado-filled videos preaching about taking back the city. Behind every tough guy's speech was the same pattern: claims that no one protects us, twisted statistics, and thinly veiled calls for violence. That night, Ethan walked into one of the bars listed in the comments, a dim place on the edge of an industrial block, where the music was loud enough to cover fights, but not so loud that people couldn't hear whispered deals. He didn't dress like a threat. Worn jacket, plain cap, hands in pockets. Just another old man out of place. That made him invisible. It took less than an hour to spot Rex. He held court at a corner table, surrounded by 2 of the men from the park and a few others Ethan had never seen before. There was a restless energy around him, the swagger of someone who had recently been humiliated and was desperate to reclaim control. Ethan didn't confront him there. That would be messy and loud. Instead, he watched, listened, noted who brought Rex drinks, who approached him respectfully, who slid envelopes across the table when they thought no one was looking. He followed one of those couriers out back, keeping to the shadows. The man dumped trash, lit a cigarette, and made a call. Yeah, I gave him the envelope, he muttered. Yeah, he's pissed. No, he knows the deal. Scare them, push them out, don't get caught. He slipped up with some old dude today, but it won't happen again. The pause on the line stretched. Then the man added, Yeah, Mr. Hale, I understand. There it was, the thread connecting the street to the boardroom. Ethan stepped forward, fast and quiet. His hand clamped over the man's mouth. Another pinned his arm behind his back. The phone clattered to the ground. Ethan leaned in. Listen carefully, he said in a low voice. You're going to tell your friends tomorrow that some old guy jumped you in the alley. You didn't see his face. You were drunk. You tripped. Got it? The man trembled and nodded against his palm. And if you ever come near Riverside Park again, Ethan continued, or anyone who lives around it, it won't be a conversation next time. Do we understand each other? A frantic nod. Ethan released him, melting back into the dark. The man scrambled inside, shouting curses to cover his fear. Ethan picked up the fallen phone, turned it off, and slipped away. The next day, he met Mia and Officer Thompson in a quiet diner. No uniforms, no cameras. Just three people who knew too much to sleep easily. Mia laid papers on the table, printouts of financial records, photos of rallies, screenshots of encrypted chat logs that had leaked. Here's what we know now, she said. Hale funnels money through civic groups that sponsor neighborhood safety initiatives. In reality, that money buys gear, transportation, and legal help for Rex and his people. In exchange, they create chaos in targeted neighborhoods. Fear goes up, property values drop, residents sell, Hale buys. Thompson rubbed his temples. This is enough to make noise, he said, but not enough to take him down clean. He's got lawyers who get paid more in a week than I make in 6 months. If we go too early, he walks and we all get buried under defamation and baseless accusations. So we don't go early, Ethan replied. We go smart. He leaned forward, tapping the scattered documents. Hale feels safe because he's far from the violence. Rex and his crew are the ones on the front line taking the risk. People like that get sloppy. And when they get sloppy, they leave things behind, messages, receipts, lists. We need something undeniable, something that connects Hale directly to orders for violence, not just donations. A plan, a directive, a playbook. Mia looked at him thoughtfully. You're suggesting we break into their nest. I'm suggesting we find their real headquarters, Ethan said. Not the bar, not the rallies. The place where they store their files, their equipment, their communications. There's always a base of operation. Thompson frowned. You're civilians. I'm a cop. But there are lines I can't cross without a warrant. Then don't cross them, Ethan said. Let us find where the evidence is. You can worry about how to make it stick afterward. Mia stared at him, then let out a short, disbelieving laugh. You know, when most men your age say they're getting back into things, they mean golf. Ethan gave a small smile. I was never very good at golf. They worked out a plan. Mia would track online patterns, messages, and addresses associated with Rex's group. Thompson would quietly pull any internal reports that mentioned them or their supposed social clubs. Ethan would be the one to check locations in person, using the old skills he'd never truly lost. By the end of the week, they had a lead. A supposedly abandoned warehouse on the edge of the river, officially leased to a storage company, with no employees and no phone number. That's it, Ethan said, looking at the grainy satellite image Mia pulled up. That's where rats like to nest. He prepared like he had for dozens of missions before. Comfortable clothes, dark colors, a flashlight, gloves, a small camera. No weapons he couldn't justify. If the worst happened, he wasn't looking for a shootout. He was looking for proof. As he stepped into the night, he felt the familiar mixture of focus and weight settle over him. He wasn't doing this for medals or commendations. There would be no speeches, no parades. He was doing it for the families walking their kids to school, for the old ladies waiting at bus stops with grocery bags, for the man he'd once been, who believed that his country could be better than its darkest instincts. The old warrior was going back into the field one more time. The warehouse smelled like dust, oil, and something uglier fear, maybe. soaked into the concrete from a dozen angry meetings. Ethan slipped in through a side door whose lock had seen better days. Inside, the darkness wasn't complete. Strips of light leaked from an office area on the second floor, where cheap blinds had been left half closed. He moved like he had been trained to move. Slow, quiet, patient. He paused at corners, listened for voices, footsteps, anything, nothing. Just the hum of old fluorescent lights and the distant drip of water somewhere in the bowels of the building. What he found made his jaw tighten. Rows of metal shelves held boxes labeled with neighborhoods he recognized, mostly places where people of color lived, where immigrants opened small businesses, where grandparents watched grandkids on front stoops. Riverside, Eastwood, Little Havana, Oak Ridge. Inside the boxes were printed flyers with slogans like "Protect Our Streets" and "Take Back Our City," carefully crafted to sound like community concern while clearly aiming to drive suspicion toward outsiders. Some boxes held stacks of cheap flags with symbols just short of illegal, masks, batons, and phones preloaded with encrypted messaging apps. He took photos of everything first, wide shots, then close-ups, hands steady, breathing slow. In a filing cabinet, he found what Mia had hoped for: manila folders with names, dates, and handwritten notes. Rex, March 3. Test pressure in Riverside. Focus on elderly. Make them feel unsafe, but don't leave marks that show in court. Tucker, February 18. Bus stop disruptions. Film reactions. Post as proof of rising crime. And at the bottom of the drawer, a folder stamped with Hale Urban Development's logo, as if someone had grown careless. Inside, payment schedules, consulting fees, and a printed email. He read it by the light of his small flashlight, every word carving itself into his memory. Ensure presence is felt in targeted zones. Objective is not injury, but psychological displacement. People don't need to be hospitalized, they just need to feel like they no longer belong. Once they move, we move in. Signed, V. Hale. This was no longer rumor or implication. This was a direct line from the polished boardroom to the bruises and fear in the streets. Ethan took pictures from multiple angles. He carefully slid the document back into place. He wasn't there to steal. He was there to expose. As he turned to leave, he heard it. The scrape of a door opening below, followed by heavy footsteps and low voices. Rex said to grab the rest of those flyers, one voice muttered. He wants another run this weekend. Yeah, and Hale wants results, another replied. He's not paying us to sit around. Ethan ducked behind a stack of crates, heart rate ticking up but not racing. He crouched, listened. Two men, armed, possibly. He watched their shadows move across the floor. One of them headed toward the shelves where he had just been. Ethan knew he had seconds, not minutes. He pulled out his phone and quickly sent a pre-written message to Thompson and Mia. Warehouse. Confirmed. Evidence here. Come now. Then he did something that surprised even him. He stepped out of hiding. The first man froze. What the? Ethan moved fast, closing the distance before the second man even processed what was happening. A palm strike to the first man's wrist sent the flashlight spinning away. A sharp elbow to the throat dropped him to his knees. The second man reached for his belt. Ethan stomped his foot and shoved him back into a metal shelf, sending boxes crashing down around them. We've met, Ethan said coldly. Park ring a bell? Recognition flashed in the man's eyes. You, he spat. You're a dead old man. I've heard that before, Ethan replied. They fought in the dim light, the warehouse turning into an echo chamber of grunts and crashes. Ethan's body protested each twist and strike, but his mind stayed crystal clear. No wasted movement, no anger, just necessity. One of them managed to grab a metal pipe and swung. Ethan blocked the impact, nearly numbing his arm, but he pivoted and threw the man over his hip, slamming him into the ground. The other lunged. Ethan caught his jacket, used his momentum, and pinned him against a crate, forearm across his throat. You work for Hale, Ethan growled. You scare old people. You harass families. You think you're soldiers. You're not. You're cowards with delusions. The man gasped, clawing at Ethan's arm. He'll bury you. No, Ethan said quietly. You're going to help me dig him up. Before he could say more, a siren wailed outside. tires screeched. Red and blue lights flashed through the dirty warehouse windows. Thompson had arrived and he'd brought backup. "Police," a voice shouted from the entrance. "Hands where we can see them." Ethan stepped back, raising his hands immediately. The two men on the floor were less graceful, scrambling and cursing as officers moved in, weapons drawn, commanding them to lie flat. In the chaos, Thompson's eyes found Ethan's. "Did you get it?" he called out, voice tight with urgency. Ethan nodded toward the office and filing cabinets. "Everything you need and more." While the suspects were cuffed and read their rights, Thompson and another detective followed Ethan to the folders, the boxes, the evidence that turned suspicion into a prosecutable case. When Thompson picked up the email with Hale's instructions, his face hardened. "This," he said, "is going to change everything. Only if people are willing to listen." Ethan replied, "Oh, they'll listen." Mia's voice came from behind them. She had slipped in, press credentials in hand, camera already rolling. "Because this time, we're not going to let them look away." The warehouse, once a place where hate was organized in the shadows, was now flooded with lights, voices, cameras, and law. The curtain had been pulled back. The question was, what would the city do with what it now saw? The courtroom was colder than Ethan expected. Not in temperature, but in mood-polished wood, high ceilings, and an air of carefully managed tension. This was where narratives were rewritten, where lawyers tried to turn monsters into misunderstood businessmen. Victor Hale sat at the defense table, looking like a man who had been told his entire life that he was untouchable. Perfect suit, perfect tie, hair neat, expression calm. If you didn't know better, you might think he was just a respectable entrepreneur caught up in a misunderstanding. But Ethan knew better. So did Mia. So did Officer Thompson. So did the family sitting quietly in the benches behind them, black, Latino, Asian, immigrant, elderly, working class. People who didn't usually have seats at tables like this. The prosecution laid out the case step by step. They showed the financial records, the shell companies, the payments disguised as consulting fees. They walked the jury through the warehouse photos, the flyers, the gear, the documents with Hale's logo and signature. They played audio from intercepted messages where Rex and his men bragged about cleaning out neighborhoods and making them sell. They read the email aloud, the one instructing that people just need to feel like they no longer belong. Hale's lawyers pushed back hard. Our client had no knowledge of these violent acts, they argued. His donations were meant for community watch groups. Any misuse was without his consent. They tried to turn Rex into a rogue actor, a bad apple who had twisted innocent intentions. Then came the witnesses. Mia testified about her investigation, the patterns she'd uncovered, the connections between fear and property sales. Thompson testified about the rising attacks, the reluctance of some officials to draw the lines between incidents. Finally, Ethan took the stand. He adjusted the microphone slightly, aware that every eye in the room was on him, not just as a witness, but as a symbol. An older black man, a veteran, someone who had fought for a country that still struggled to fully accept him. "Mr. Cole," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court what happened to you in Riverside Park on the day in question?" Ethan told the story plainly. No embellishment, no dramatics, just facts. The insults, the shoves, the threats, the way the men moved like they'd done it before. He described their symbols, their deliberate targeting, their confidence. "Did you at any point provoke the attack?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Ethan replied. "I asked them to move on. They refused." "What did you feel in that moment?" He paused. "I felt tired. Tired of seeing the same hatred wearing new clothes. Tired of watching younger generations inherit old poisons. But I also felt something else." "What was that?" "Responsibility," Ethan said quietly. "I've spent my life being trained to protect people. That doesn't end because my hair turns gray. Men like the ones who attacked me, they count on older people being too afraid, too fragile, too alone to stand up. But we're not just victims. We're witnesses, and we still have a duty." The defense attorney tried to paint him as a hot-headed ex-soldier who overreacted, but the jury didn't seem to buy it. Every time the defense implied he was too old to remember clearly, the jury visibly shifted, many of them older themselves, or with parents and grandparents they loved. When closing arguments came, the prosecutor looked the jury in the eye. This isn't just about one man in a suit and one group of thugs on the street, she said. This is about what kind of city we want to be. Do we allow fear to be weaponized so that the vulnerable are driven from their homes? Do we turn away when older people, people of color, immigrants are targeted not by accident but by design? Or do we say, not here, not us, not anymore? The jury deliberated for hours, long enough for doubt to creep in. Hale sat perfectly still, his confidence cracking only slightly around the eyes. When the jurors filed back in, the room held its breath. On the charge of funding racially motivated violence, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit intimidation and displacement, guilty. On the charge of money laundering and fraud, guilty. The words landed like distant thunder, rolling through the room. Some people gasped. Some cried quietly. Hale's mask finally slipped, shock and fury twisting his features. He was sentenced to years in federal prison, his assets seized, his company dismantled. Rex and his crew had already received their sentences, lengthy ones, with hate crime enhancements. The message, at least on paper, was clear. Calculated hatred had a price. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Mia, Thompson, and Ethan. Questions flew. Mr. Cole, how does it feel to know your actions helped bring down Victor Hale? Ethan looked up at the courthouse steps, then at the faces around him. Some were young, some old. Some looked like him, some didn't. But all of them were watching. It wasn't just me, he said. It was everyone who refused to look away. It was a cop who listened when it was easier not to. A journalist who followed the truth even when it was dangerous. Neighbors who reported what they saw. People who believe that this city belongs to all of us. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I'm an old man, he continued with a small smile. I've seen a lot of ugliness in my time, but I've also seen something else. People who stand up when it counts. Racism, hatred, those things don't disappear in one trial or one sentence. They adapt, they wait, but so do we. And as long as there are elders willing to speak, to testify, to teach, and to protect, we're not helpless. We're not done. Later, as the crowd thinned, a young woman wheeled her grandfather up to Ethan. The old man had deep lines on his face and kind eyes. I just wanted to say thank you, the grandfather said. My family lives in Riverside. I was thinking of moving, you know. Fear does that to you, makes you want to shrink your world. But watching you, I realized maybe I've got more fight left in me than I thought. Ethan smiled and reached out, clasping the man's hand. We've all got more fight than they expect, he replied. Sometimes we just need a reminder. That evening, Ethan returned to Riverside Park. The bench was still there. The trees still whispered. Children were playing. Elders were chatting. And life, messy, stubborn, beautiful life continued. He sat down, opened echoes of freedom again, and felt the weight of the day settle into something like peace. Not because the battle was over, but because for once the right side had won around. As the sun dipped low, a teenage boy walked past, hesitated, and turned back. Hey, sir, the boy said. My grandma lives around here. She told me about you. She said you proved that getting old doesn't mean getting weak. It just means you've had more time to learn what's worth fighting for. Ethan chuckled softly. Your grandma sounds like a very smart woman. She is, the boy said. She told me to listen to old people more. I'm starting to think she's right. Do that, Ethan replied. People who've lived long have seen what works and what doesn't. We're not perfect, but we've got stories, and stories can keep you from making the same mistakes. As the boy walked away, Ethan looked out over the park at the elders, the families, the mix of faces and languages. This was the America he believed in. Imperfect, wounded, but capable of choosing courage over fear. He closed his book, feeling the scar on his ribs ache faintly, a reminder of past battles. Then he smiled to himself. Old didn't mean finished, and as long as he could stand, watch, and speak, he would keep playing his part in the long, unfinished story of justice. Ethan Cole's story leaves us with one powerful truth. Age does not erase purpose, it sharpens it. He may have had gray hair, aching knees, and memories heavy enough to break a weaker man. But what defined him wasn't the years behind him. It was the courage still alive inside him. When hatred tried to intimidate him in the park, he didn't stand up only for himself. He stood up for every elder, every immigrant family, every neighbor who has ever been told they don't belong. What Ethan teaches us is simple but vital. Silence is not safety. Looking away never stopped injustice. Real change begins when ordinary people, especially those who have lived long enough to recognize old patterns, refuse to be pushed aside. Elders like Ethan carry wisdom earned through sacrifice, and that wisdom becomes a weapon against fear. He showed that getting old doesn't make you weak. It makes you harder to fool, harder to intimidate, harder to defeat. His fight wasn't about violence, it was about dignity. His testimony in court didn't just bring down a powerful man. It reminded the whole city that communities survive when people stand up, speak out, and protect one another. Hate may adapt and hide behind polished suits or street thugs, but so does courage, and courage grows stronger when shared. So here's the real lesson. No matter your age, your story still counts, your voice still matters, and your presence can still shift the world around you. Ethan didn't win because he was the toughest man in the room. He won because he refused to let fear define the rest of his life. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs strength today. And if you're new here, subscribe so you never miss another meaningful story. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment. Thank you for watching. May you stay healthy, peaceful, and joyful in this precious chapter of life. You are not done. You are still needed.